I was rude to my boss, with whom I have been working for 5 years, and it changed my life in a completely unexpected way. When I landed my first real job in marketing, I thought I had finally arrived. After years of grinding through school while juggling retail shifts and freelance gigs, I had finally earned a spot in the kind of office I'd always dreamed about. Sleek desks, big clients, and brainstorming sessions that felt like the stuff of movies. It was everything I'd worked for. My boss, Tom, was the creative director, and at first, I thought I could learn a lot from him. He had the confidence of someone who'd been in the game for decades. The way he owned every meeting, rattling off critiques like he was the smartest guy in the room, was intimidating but also kind of inspiring. I figured this was just what working at a top-tier company was like. Intense, fast-paced, and full of sharp personalities. I threw myself into the work. I stayed late, volunteered for tough assignments, and didn't blink when Tom asked me to scrap entire presentations at the 11th hour. I thought that by proving I could take the pressure, I'd earn his respect and maybe, someday, a promotion. But it didn't take long for the cracks to show. Tom's tough love started to feel a lot less like love and a lot more like bullying. He'd nitpick my ideas in front of the team, then laugh it off by saying, "It's nothing personal, just business." The constant put-down started chipping away at my confidence. My enthusiasm for the job, the thing I dreamed of for so long, was fading fast. Looking back, I should have seen it sooner. This wasn't just a tough environment. It was toxic, and it was taking a toll on more than just my work ethic. It was starting to feel personal. At first, I tried to shrug it off. Everyone in the office seemed to accept Tom's behavior as part of the culture. "That's just how he is," my coworkers would say. Some even wore his harsh criticism like a badge of honor, joking about how many Tom takedowns they'd survived. I told myself I just needed to toughen up, that it was all part of paying my dues. But the truth was, it was wearing me down. What started as subtle jabs grew sharper over time. If I didn't stay late enough to meet Tom's last-minute demands, I'd get comments about my lack of dedication. If I pitched something creative, he'd find a way to twist my words in front of everyone, making me feel like an idiot. Even when I met deadlines or went above and beyond, I rarely got so much as a nod of approval. Soon, it wasn't just the job that felt like a grind. It was my whole life. I started dreading Mondays like never before. The passion I'd once had for marketing, the excitement of brainstorming campaigns and crafting big ideas, was completely gone. The worst part was how much it bled into my personal life. I was constantly on edge, snapping at my girlfriend over little things. When I visited my parents, I could barely enjoy dinner without ranting about Tom. My dad, who'd worked in construction his whole life, kept telling me, "If you hate it so much, just quit." But I wasn't ready to give up. I thought maybe things would change if I worked harder or found a way to stand out. But no matter how much effort I put in, it was never enough for Tom. It wasn't long before I started to wonder, was it the job, or was it me? I'd love to say I saw the writing on the wall and walked away before things got worse, but I didn't. Despite everything, I stayed. For 5 long years, I kept my head down, grinding away at a job that was slowly sucking the life out of me. So, why didn't I leave? It wasn't as simple as Tom being a jerk. It was the nagging feeling that I was so close to achieving the career I'd always dreamed of. The company had a solid reputation, the kind that looked great on a resume. My clients were big names in the industry, and every so often, we'd pull off a campaign that reminded me why I'd gotten into marketing in the first place. Then there was the money. I wasn't exactly rolling in it, but I was making more than I'd ever made before. I'd finally gotten out of my college-era studio apartment and into a decent place with my girlfriend, Emily. I could afford nice dinners, pay off a little student debt, and even save for the future. Walking away from all that felt risky, maybe even reckless. But the biggest thing keeping me there? Fear. I didn't want to admit it at the time, but I was terrified of starting over. What if I quit and couldn't find another job? What if every boss was like Tom, and this was just the reality of the industry? It wasn't like I didn't think about leaving. There were plenty of nights where I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd be happier doing something else. But whenever I started drafting my resignation letter, the doubts crept in. Would I regret throwing away 5 years of experience? What would people think if I quit without a backup plan? So, I stayed. And every day, it got harder to convince myself I'd made the right choice. I was constantly walking on eggshells, trying to anticipate Tom's criticisms before they came. My passion for the work was long gone. I was just going through the motions, trying to survive. I felt stuck, trapped between the fear of leaving and the misery of staying. And the worst part was, I couldn't imagine a way out. What I didn't realize was that the way out was coming. Whether I was ready or not, it happened during one of those endless team meetings that had become my least favorite part of the job. Tom was pacing the room like a drill sergeant, flipping through slides from the presentation we were prepping for a major client. This was supposed to be the kind of project that excited me, a chance to showcase my creativity and make an impact. But I'd spent weeks rewriting, revising, and second-guessing everything, all to keep Tom's inevitable criticisms at bay. Sure enough, he didn't disappoint. "This is what you're bringing to the table?" Tom sneered, holding up one of the key slides I'd designed. "I've seen more compelling work from interns." The jab stung, but I bit my tongue like I always did, waiting for him to move on. Except he didn't. He zeroed in on me, picking apart every detail, calling the concept uninspired, the visuals lazy, and the messaging off-brand. I felt the familiar flush of humiliation rising. But this time, it was worse. He wasn't just criticizing the work. He was attacking me. "I really thought by now you'd understand what this job requires." Guess I was wrong. Something inside me snapped. "Maybe if you actually gave clear direction instead of nitpicking everything after the fact, we'd get better results." I shot back, my voice sharp enough to cut through the tension in the room. The air went thick with silence. My coworkers stared at me, their eyes wide. You could hear a pin drop. Tom turned to me, his expression a mix of shock and amusement, as if he couldn't quite believe someone had dared to talk back to him. "Excuse me," he said, his tone low and menacing. "You heard me," I said, my voice steady now. "This isn't leadership. It's micromanaging. You tear people down instead of building them up, and honestly, it's no wonder morale here is in the toilet." I couldn't believe the words were coming out of my mouth, but once I started, I couldn't stop. Years of frustration poured out all at once, fueled by a mix of anger and sheer adrenaline. Tom's face darkened, and he leaned back in his chair, folding his arms. "Careful," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "You're not irreplaceable." That hit me harder than I expected, but not in the way he probably intended. Because in that moment, I realized he was right. I wasn't irreplaceable, but neither was he, or this job. The next words came out before I had a chance to second-guess myself. "You're right. I'm not. And I don't need to be. I quit." The room erupted in whispers, but I didn't care. I grabbed my laptop, my notebook, and my dignity, and walked out of that meeting without looking back. My heart was pounding, my palms were sweating, and I felt like I might throw up. But for the first time in years, I also felt free. The fallout would come later, but in that moment, I didn't care. I was done. And for the first time in a long time, I was finally putting myself first. Walking out of that meeting had felt like a victory, but as soon as I stepped into the parking lot, the doubts hit me like a ton of bricks. My hands were still shaking as I unlocked my car. What the hell had I just done? Sure, I'd stood up to Tom, and yeah, it felt good in the moment. But now, I was jobless, with no plan and a pile of bills waiting for me at home. I sat there for a long time, staring at the steering wheel, replaying the scene in my head. The look on Tom's face, the gasps from my coworkers, the way I'd stormed out without thinking about what came next. Part of me felt proud, like I'd finally stood up for myself after years of putting up with his crap. But another part of me? Terrified. I didn't even make it home before the dread set in. I realized I'd left half my stuff at my desk, my notebooks, my planner, even my favorite coffee mug. I thought about emailing HR and asking them to mail it all to me, but something inside me said no. I didn't want Tom to think I was scared. I needed to go back and face him one more time. The next morning, I walked into the office with my head high, trying to ignore the stares from my coworkers. The office had the heavy, awkward energy of a place that had just witnessed a public explosion, and I could feel eyes on me as I headed to my desk. Tom's door was open, and of course, he saw me immediately. He didn't waste any time. "Well, look who's back," he said loudly enough for half the office to hear. "Here to apologize?" I turned to face him. "No, Tom. I'm here to get my things." He smirked and leaned back in his chair like he'd been waiting for this. "You sure you don't want to reconsider?" Storming out was a pretty childish move. "But if you're ready to grow up and act like a professional, maybe we can pretend yesterday didn't happen." That was it. Whatever tiny shred of regret I'd been feeling disappeared in an instant. "You know what, Tom? That's exactly why I left. You talk about professionalism like it's something you understand, but the only thing you're good at is tearing people down. You don't lead, you bully. You take credit for everyone else's work and act like it's some gift for the rest of us to even be here. Well, I'm done." I could feel the entire office watching now, their heads peeking over cubicles and monitors. Tom's face turned red, and for a second, I thought he might actually lose his cool. "You'll regret this," he spat, his voice low but trembling with anger. "You think you're going to make it out there on your own? Without me? You're nothing without this company, and you're sure as hell nothing without me." That hit a nerve, but instead of firing back, I just smiled. "If you really think that, Tom, then you've got no idea what I'm capable of. You'll see." I turned and walked out, my box of stuff under one arm, ignoring the whispers and wide eyes of my coworkers. I didn't know what was waiting for me on the other side of those doors, but one thing was clear. I was done letting Tom define my worth. The fallout wasn't over, but I was finally ready to face whatever came next. The first week after I walked out was disorienting, to say the least. I'd wake up each morning and feel this strange mix of freedom and fear. On one hand, I didn't have to endure Tom's constant criticism anymore. On the other hand, I had no idea what my next move was. I tried to dive into job applications, but it was hard to focus. So much of my confidence had been chipped away during those years under Tom that even looking at my resume felt overwhelming. What could I say about my time there? That I'd survived? It didn't help that every time I updated my LinkedIn profile or emailed an old colleague, a tiny voice in the back of my head whispered, "What if you made a mistake?" But after a few days of wallowing, I decided enough was enough. I wasn't going to let one toxic boss ruin the career I'd worked so hard for. If anything, I realized I had something I hadn't had in years, a blank slate. I started thinking about the projects I'd loved the most during my time at the agency. They weren't the big, flashy campaigns for huge corporations. They were the smaller ones, the ones where I worked directly with local businesses and saw the immediate impact of my work. That's when the idea hit me. Maybe I didn't need to look for another job. Maybe I could start something of my own. I spent the next few days buried in research, trying to figure out how freelancing worked. I dusted off old notebooks filled with ideas I'd never had the time to pursue, and for the first time in years, I felt a spark of excitement. It was terrifying, sure, but also exhilarating. I wasn't just looking for a way to pay the bills. I was looking for a way to reclaim the passion I'd lost. By the end of the week, I'd made up my mind. It was time to stop letting fear control me and start building something I could be proud of. Once I made the decision to start my own business, I felt a surge of energy I hadn't experienced in years. The fear of the unknown was still there, but for the first time, it wasn't paralyzing. It was motivating. I spent hours sketching out a plan, figuring out what services I could offer, and listing potential clients. Of course, there were challenges. I didn't have much in the way of savings, so I knew I had to land some work quickly if I wanted to keep the lights on. I reached out to old contacts, sent emails to small businesses in the area, and even made a website using one of those free builder tools. It was scrappy, but it felt good to be doing something for myself. The first break came sooner than I expected. A former client from my old job reached out after hearing I'd gone solo. "I always liked working with you," she said. "Tom was well, Tom. I'm glad you're doing your own thing. Let's talk about how we can work together." That first contract was small, but it gave me the confidence I needed to keep going. Before long, I was juggling multiple clients, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was in control of my career. What surprised me the most was how much I enjoyed the work again. Without Tom breathing down my neck, I rediscovered the creativity and excitement that had drawn me to marketing in the first place. It wasn't easy. There were plenty of late nights and moments of doubt, but it felt worth it in a way that my old job never had. As the weeks turned into months, I started to realize something. Leaving wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. A few months after I'd walked out of that meeting and started my own business, I was finally beginning to feel like I'd found my footing. My small roster of clients was growing steadily, and I was finally earning enough to breathe a little easier. More importantly, I was happy, happier than I'd been in years. One afternoon, as I was wrapping up a pitch for a potential client, my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and froze. It was Tom. For a moment, I debated ignoring it. After everything that had happened, what could he possibly want? Curiosity got the better of me, though, and I picked up. "Hey," I said cautiously. "Hey," he replied, his tone unusually subdued. For a second, I thought I might be imagining things, but Tom actually sounded uncomfortable. "I, just wanted to check in," he began. "I've been hearing things about your new business. Sounds like you're doing pretty well." I didn't know what to say, so I just let him keep talking. "Look," he continued, "I've been thinking about what you said that day, about the way I manage people, and I think you were right." I almost dropped my phone. Tom? Admitting he was wrong? He sighed heavily. "I pushed you too hard, and I know I never gave you the credit you deserved. Losing you made me realize how much I relied on you. The team hasn't been the same without you." I felt a weird mix of emotions, vindication, disbelief, and, if I'm honest, a little satisfaction. "Anyway," he said, clearing his throat, "if you ever wanted to come back, I could make it worth your while. Better pay, more responsibility. I'd make sure you had more respect this time." I took a deep breath, letting his words sink in. A part of me wanted to laugh. After everything I'd endured, now he wanted me back? But mostly, I just felt calm. "Thanks, Tom," I said, "but I'm good where I am. Starting my own business was the best decision I ever made. I appreciate the call, but I don't think I'll be coming back." There was a long pause, and then he sighed again. "I understand," he said quietly. "Good luck out there." After I hung up, I just sat there for a while, processing what had happened. The call wasn't an apology, not really. Not in the way I'd wanted for so long. But it was enough. Tom had been wrong about me. I wasn't replaceable, and I wasn't defined by that job. Walking away had been terrifying, but it had also been the turning point I needed. Now, when I think about that chapter of my life, I don't feel anger or regret anymore. Just gratitude. Because if it hadn't been for Tom, I might never have had the courage to find out what I was truly capable of. What would you do in a similar situation? Share your opinion in the comments.